Great. So thank you, Gerard, and welcome to Cybernetics Society. You're very welcome, and greatly appreciate you for contributing to our Cybernetics Live on this spring day around the world, it seems. By way of your background, well, I started to read it, Gerard, and then I read some more. And I read some more. And I read some more. That's quite a bio you have, but let's just start with the 100 publications and 5 books. Most recent is The Third Law of Evolution and the Future of Life. That's a beautiful title. 2 PhDs along the way. And I think the rest is over to you, Gerard, but you're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I thank Margaret very much for inviting me
Absolutely. Yeah,
to
absolutely.
the society, and it's great to have this opportunity. So I think there's a long slideshow in front of us, so maybe we should just start. I started this around 1993, the work on this topic, and it was a long journey for me beside my normal work and my family. So life was very busy. But the question of today that I've been working on for a long time is, can you not? Well, I didn't immediately start with predicting evolution. I started just to work on levels of complexity and where the toxicants can work at different levels. And then the question was, what is a level? Well, then I found a way to create levels, and then I could attack the question of, can evolution be predicted in a new way? So that's what we will see today. So what I will focus on is agents that combine several feedback processes, and in this way provide a new perspective on evolution and complexity. Um, I, I have been asked by some people, wow, it's a very broad theory. Is it a theory of everything? No, it's absolutely not a theory of everything. It's a theory of these specific agents and what you can do with them. That's what the theory is about. So I will give a short introduction of the talk. First, there will be a few slides about evolution. What is it? How do we think about it normally? Then there will be some slides about predictability of evolution. Then there will be slides about evolution of complex agents, where I introduce operator theory. Then some new approaches to exploring the future will be discussed, and I end with uh, the role that maybe robots are going to play as a normal part of evolution. So this is the rough sketch of the talk. Well, to start with evolution itself, what do we actually consider evolution? There's the general approach of evolution, and that is from the Latin evolvere, which means unrolling. Well, the unrolling of a scroll shows the next part of the parchment. So it's a process that happens everywhere all the time. Stuart Kaufman actually says he talks about the adjacent possible. So evolution brings us into the adjacent possible. I think nature has no choice because nature can only work from what is already there. So you always run into the adjacent possible. If you look at evolution this way, you think about evolution as change or growth or development. And then you have to say that water evolves from the tap, which I'm not very fond of saying, that solar systems evolve towards later stages. I think they change, and that plants evolve from the soil. Well, this is feels a bit sort of uneasy for me as a biologist, because I'm more used to evolution in the sense of Darwin, and that means descent with modification through variation and natural selection. Well, everyone knows what this is, but I will show it nevertheless. The peppered moth in England is a very good example. You start with some light moths, and they get children. Some are dark, some are not dark. And then the blue tits come, and they eat the lighter ones. And then there are still dark ones and light ones, and the blue tits eat more, and you end up with dark ones. So that's easy. Oh, wait. I have to say okay here. Then. So, but now we tend to see Darwinian evolution as a process, but I've changed that slowly because I could think more specifically about it when thinking about it as a pattern. And I'll show you why. If you have one parent, for example, a bacteria, and it splits in two, then there is this process that we call reproduction or splitting, and that yields two daughter bacteria. And they may be different, but the difference is not a process, it's variation and it's a pattern. And then each of them can either grow or live or die, and all these things are processes. And what results is that some survive and others don't. And that again, the difference is the selection pattern. So what we see here is a pattern based on several processes, and the pattern has a number of criteria. So that's why I consider evolution a pattern as the result of underlying processes. Well, we've seen this, and you can, of course, continue and think about larger schemes, but you have to, from my point of view, you need the schemes to really reason about evolution. And then I will talk about evolution laws, and two laws are very well known. The first law I consider imperfect reproduction leads to variation. Well, you have hardly any choice. If you reproduce imperfectly and you have two or more children, that's variation. The second law, differential survival, leads to selection. That means, like, if they are not equally well adapted to the environment and some die and others don't, you get a pattern that is the pattern of selection. And if this is all diverging patterns. And if it would be like this, bacteria would always get bacteria as offspring, and new bacteria as offspring, and new bacteria as offspring. But to get further, to create more complexity than bacteria, you need what I call the third law, and that is the evolution of complex structure. And here I give the example of a eukaryotic cell, and the combination of of two bacteria, a large one and a small one, and then the endosymbiont living of them, is a converging process. So we have diverging and converging aspects of evolution that we have to take care of. Which then was a short introduction to how you can look at evolution. And now is the question, how predictable is evolution? Well, that is a theme of considerable debate. And why? It's a matter of perspective, I think. I don't have all the pictures of you here, but I can ask you to raise hands if you think that evolution is not predictable. Who raises hands? Not predictable. Normally, if I speak for a room with many people, I can sort of let people see how many hands there are. That's fun. Here it's a bit more difficult. Okay, so there are two perspectives. One is no, you can't predict evolution, and the other is yes, you can. And for the time being, I will talk to the people saying no, you can't, and I agree with that. You can't. And the first reason for that is that genetic variation is largely random. And that's because deletion and duplication and insertion and translocation and inversion and crossing over during meiosis and network dependency of genes in their genetic network in a cell and genetic drift are all random. So this makes it very hard to predict what will happen after a few generations. Another reason why you cannot predict evolution is that complexity can increase or decrease depending on conditions. Yeah, what will it be? And it's even harder because there can be changing future situations for acceptations. I have three examples here. One is the coelacanth, and it has beautiful fins that helped it or its forefathers to get onto the land. And then first lizards and finally birds arose. But in birds, you have fins that became actually wings. Well, could a coelacanth have predicted wings? I don't know. And if you have wings and a beak, then you can think about what can you do with your beak. Well, once there are flowers, but how are you going to predict flowers? You can predict a very thin beak of a hummingbird. So acceptations throw what they say mud in the water or something. It's very hard to foresee acceptations. And then the fourth criterion why evolution is hard to predict, and this is a very fundamental one, is chaos theory. And that is if there is feedback on a certain process, then if there are small differences at the beginning, they will become larger and larger. And I've got a nice example from the internet. If you look at these, you can see that the fingers that hold this balance are not exactly in the same position, and they will not let the thing go at exactly the same moment. So look at this. They are almost the same at the beginning. So there are hardly any differences, but there's feedback. Still hardly anything to be seen. But, oh, here we go. So the very small differences at the beginning are now causing major differences in what the things are doing. So chaos theory fundamentally makes it impossible to predict evolution in an exact way. But now with no, you can't, and that's true. Any replay of the tape of life would never ever yield exactly the same result. I agree, but there's also a yes to this question. Can you predict evolution? And I think yes, you can if you look at other things. You can predict evolution because resource change will emerge. And that's, for example, life on Earth started, I assume, with gray smokers or black smokers. Um, the people do not agree exactly on how this has gone. It's not relevant. But what is needed is that there is a metabolic cycle that harvests energy and creates a driving force for evolution, for a driving force for growth and multiplication, and then evolution. And this has been worked out in publication of Pross. He actually invented it a little before me, and I invented it as well. But okay, it's good to see that this is there. So if you have a gray smoker and you have the right conditions, that you create primitive bacteria, maybe protocells that become bacteria or archaea. Then the bacteria have the motor, the autocatalytic chemistry in themselves to multiply. And this blue area is a sort of a field for events of evolution. And I will also show what happens with the energy that they use. Well, first we had a gray smoker, which is chemical energy, and now we have sunlight. And if sunlight is harvested by plants that evolve finally from bacteria and up, then the plant uses the sunlight and produces waste and heat, and a lot of water vapor actually. Then there will be, if there are plants, there will be herbivores. They will evolve and they use the energy of the plants and produce waste and heat. And then generalists like human beings, and they consume everything that they can and produce waste and heat. So this is a very general picture of what evolution will result in, because this is what is where there is energy to proceed. And then the second point, why what you can predict from evolution. Well, a specific environment will lead to specific adaptations. Here we have a specific environment, and if I were a plant, how do you think this plant would look like? It had to look like, maybe. Oh yeah, in a classroom or in a what is it? lecture. If the people are there, I can easily ask it. Now I can't really. Okay. I think this is a marvelous example of how plants look like if they are in a stony environment like this, and it's very dry. Well, there's another environment, water. If you want to uh, move very fast through the water, maybe to chase fish or something, then it is almost unavoidable that you get an appearance like something like this. So this is actually fairly predictable, not in its details, but in its overall appearances. So then there is another point in evolution that you can predict. If you have a complex construction and it brings you something that it would otherwise not, it pays off. Well, here we see a movie which is bigger and more engulfing, or how do you say that? It has the possibility to engulf things, and that's why it can use smaller protozoa as food. And here is a crab that eats a shrimp, also because it has a bit more complex structure than the shrimp, and the shrimp was actually caught, so it can eat it. Yeah, what do we mean by complex structure? And I will focus on the complexification of construction. Well, for example, the Earth, evolution on Earth started with bacteria, and then we got protozoa that could eat bacteria or each other. And then we had algae and plants, and they remain there, so they don't disappear from the system when something more complex emerges, but still more complex things emerge, like animals. The Earth did not have animals in the beginning, so they came later. So this is complexification of construction. And the question is, of course, can we analyze this construction in a more precise way? Well, that means that we have to focus on complexification of construction in detail. And that is the third part of this talk, where I will focus on evolution of complex agents. So, to start with this topic, I have to introduce some theoretic points of view. And one of the points of view is that I think all the agents share a basic configuration. This is a very abstract aspect. And the example I give is a cell. Well, this is probably a somewhat known figure for some of you. Kaufman has used it for his autocatalytic chemistry. And he says the catalytic reactions here form a cycle. And they have to, because otherwise they can't sustain the circle of them all. But in water, they would all float away. So you need a membrane to surround them. So we have two basic aspects of the configuration of agents in nature. They have some form of closed process at the basis, and they have a closed spatial space. Yeah. And that together I call dual closure. It's a bit a simplification, dual closure, because there are more things, because the two closures are also dependent, so that would be a third closure. But dual closure, or if you like, double closure, is just a simple way of indicating this kind of. So it's a basic pictogram for an agent with dual closure, is this, and I call an agent with this basic configuration an operator. And now I have to explain a little bit more about this very simple picture. And that is that if you have this, you can from there build the next one. And that works in this way. You have two entities like we just discussed at level n, and they perform a new process also at level n, which is a process closure. And then they create a spatial closure also at level n, and this together is an operator at level n plus 1. So now we've gone one level up. And this is a story that you can repeat, and I thank this sentence to Professor Henk Baardenbrecht, who was in my and who helped me. He asked me before the PhD, could you please come to my university and explain the thing? And we stood 2 hours in front of the blackboard and we talked and we made nice drawings. And he is actually one of the people who really understood what I was doing. And in one of my books, he has written a chapter where he says, and then the story repeats. And that is true because once you have an operator, it is always the basis for the structure of the next operator. So this is a very fundamental construction loop. I will soon give real examples. This is all very abstract. I hope you don't lose me. Well, I'm going a little bit further. This picture is very basic. And that's why I call it a base operator. The word base operator is something I think to Tyler Volk, who wrote From Quarks to Culture, a book which has many overlap with my work. We are discussing things together. I enjoy that very much. So a base operator is just the simplest form of dual closure. But you can have more complicated forms, like a composite operator, where you have, for example, this is a cell and it's attached to another cell. And these two cells can be seen as the basis of a combined dual closure. I hope this is not too abstract. The same happens, for example, with an endosymbiont, where you have one cell with its process closure, and it has engulfed another cell with its process closure. And the two cells can be seen as the basic elements of the dual closure of a composite operator. Well, so far for theory. And from theory, it's always good to now look into nature and see what really has happened and how the operators came to be. And that actually represents what I will show, a basic perspective in big history, which offers a different view than most people in big history are used to. Well, the early universe was, I think, pure energy. Nobody knows exactly. But in the beginning, there was no structure. And soon, when it became big enough for the quarks and gluons to be present, then these particles formed, maybe also because the universe cooled down while expanding. And when it expanded more, the quarks were moved so much apart, at least the expansion would move the quarks apart, but the quarks don't want that because the gluons keep them together. So that's when the hadrons formed. And if you then have a hadron, you can see you have quarks as the basic units, you have gluons forming the process closure, and you have quark confinement, which is a force field keeping them together, as the spatial closure. Yeah. Once we have once we have hadrons, sorry, I give here a picture of 3 hadrons. Just as an example, here they are the same, but hadrons come in all different varieties. But you can think of protons and protons and neutrons exchange very small hadrons. They're called pions, and they keep the protons and neutrons together, and then they attract an electron, and that is the spatial closure around the process at the center. Of course, this is known as an atom, and you have protons and neutrons as the basic elements. You have pions causing the process closure, and you have electrons causing the spatial closure. then we are at operator type number 3, and that is once we have an atom and another one, certain atoms are capable of exchanging electrons and in that way binding themselves by covalent binding, or in my view, you can also use metal bond, metal C, that's an electron C that keeps the atoms of a metal together. So then you get a molecule, and a molecule is where operator A joins operator B. So this is a composite operator because it consists of operators. And there are atoms as the elements, the electrons as the process closure, and the shared electron shell as the spatial closure. I use green colors here and in the subsequent slides hereafter to indicate that the thing is a composite operator. Well, level 4, here we have an autocatalytic set, which is made from catalytic molecules, and it's surrounded by a membrane. And we call that a cell, could be a bacterial cell or an archaeal cell. That's not relevant for this way of analyzing things. You have enzymes and they form a catalytic cycle, and then there's the membrane around it. So we still have the same basic pattern. Then we have operator type 5A. There's also a 5B, so the hierarchy splits here. We have one cell and it connects to another cell, but when they are just laying together, they're just two cells laying together. They're not one operator. So the solution here is to make pores in the membrane so that the plasma of both cells can connect. And then they have also a connected membrane. And this happens in cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae. And then two of those cells are connected by plasma bonds and they have a shared membrane. Then the parallel operator type, because the hierarchy splits, is another solution. You have a large cell and the small cell starts living in it, and they both communicate and they have the same membrane as the unifying aspect. This is what I call a host cell. Other people would say a eukaryotic cell. But the karyos, the nucleus of the cell, disappears when the cells are dividing in many species. So in that moment, you could not speak about eukaryotic cell actually. And I prefer criteria that are always present. And that's why I speak of a host cell, where there is a guest cell inhabiting the space of the host cell. And like mitochondria, no matter what happens with the cell, whether it divides or everything, mitochondria can't go away because then the cell is without energy. So this is a constant criteria. It's always correct. So we have a cell and a cell in it. They form a joint physiology. And there is a membrane around it. So we have a dual closure again. Well, once we have a host cell, we can connect it to another host cell. We have plasma connections again, and we have a multi-host cellular, which other people would call a multicellular. But then you have a problem because it can be bacterial multicellularity or eukaryotic multicellularity. So that's why I prefer to talk about a multi-host cellular. There are new examples like plants. There are classical examples like one of these. I actually don't know the name, but this is one of the structures in the Cambrium or Precambrium that were considered sort of the first animals. Sponges do not belong here because the cells of sponges don't have plasma connections. You have two host cells connected by plasma connections and a shared membrane, and that's the next dual closure. And now for the next dual closure, there's a problem What you see here is, of course, two trees being connected by a branch that grows from one tree to the next. But if that happens, it just is an example of a multi-host cellular structure. It is not two individuals because they are all connected by plasma connections, the cells of these trees. So they are not something new. Yeah, there's no new kind of process closure. So what can nature do to create a new kind of organization beyond eukaryotic multicellularity, the host multicellular? Well, the innovation nature found, at least as I analyze it, is integration of host cells inside a multi-host cellular. And how do you create an integration of cells inside a host cell? Well, this is a simplified picture of the structure of a multicellular being. It consists of many cells, the small chambers here in this picture, and they're all connected by plasma. So this is a multicellular organism where all cells are connected by plasma, and that's why it is a multicellular organism and not just a colony. But how do you get beyond this? Because chemical gradients have always existed in multicellular beings. At least they have from very early on been used to organize the structure of these beings. So that is not new. And the fact that they have cells that are connected to their neighbors is also not new. But what would be new is an extension of a cell. This cell now has an extension to this cell, which is much farther away than its neighbor. And that is new. And if this cell here has an extension back to the cell that first started to do the signaling, you get a feedback process between two cells, and that can serve as a small memory. Well, of course, you can't learn much if you are in a multicellular environment. So you need sensors. So these cells also connect to other cells that function as sensors. And to move the whole thing, the neural basis also connects to glands or muscles so that things can happen. So here now we are back to, is this an operator? Yes, I think, because these neural clusters that act as memory are communicating with each other while building knowledge. Oh, and there is a spatial closure of sensors and activators within which this neural process functions and where it connects to. I call this structure the memon structure. Here you can see roughly how it looks in human beings. And there's, of course, a lot of tissue around the memon, but that is because the memon emerged within these tissues. A simple example is a mouse, and you have neural groups that communicate through neural signals and that are surrounded by sensors. Well, now we can make an overview of all the types that we have just introduced. And here you see a hierarchy from hadrons to atoms, to molecules to cells, and from cells to either multicellulars or host cells, then to multi-host cellulars and to memons. This is a stringent hierarchy because it does not allow you to just add another level or take a level out, because it is dual closure that is the rule for every level. So if you introduce something that does not have dual closure, it cannot be in here. And that is interesting. And I've also shown all the basic pictures and the composite pictures, and they are now joined to this hierarchy so that we can see how it developed structurally. And you can actually go further with simplification. You can make a sort of algorithm out of this, I used the notation of Henk Barendrecht, the mathematics professor, because he came with this star between brackets as the simplified representation of an operator. And well, you have a simple operator at level 1, then you immediately go to an operator at level 2, which then has a composite form. Then you go to the operator at level 3, which has several composites forms, and then you go to the operator at level 4. So interestingly, there seems to be a logic that can be, almost made into an algorithm. I think this is a form of an algorithm for complexity increase. Which brings me to exploring the future, because if you have an algorithm, in principle, you could extrapolate it to the future and then use that to have ideas or create ideas about what will be there in the future. So I will use the third law of evolution, which is dual closure leads to the emergence of next level operators. And that's a convergent process. I have to say, convergent, nature can only build on what is already there. But when talking about dual closures, you don't have to have the object with dual closure of the lower level to build the dual closure of the next level. You can also have any object creating the next dual closure. So it is the dual closure structure that is leading in the hierarchy, not the physical elements building it. Well, if we want to predict the next operator, there are several things we can do. And the main thing is to look for regularities as a basis of extrapolation. Well, the first regularity in the operator hierarchy is, of course, that everything has to be an operator when it is in the hierarchy. So here we see the hierarchy, and then what would be the next thing? Well, it is always an operator. And here there are other hierarchies where that, for example, suggest that human society or cities or that sort of things are at the top of the hierarchy, and that is where evolution will go. But a city or a human society is not an operator. So that's why these suggestions don't work when you use this point of view, for good reasons. There's no sponges in here because they're just cells attaching to a common frame, but they have no plasma connections, so they are not even multicellular. They are just like cities. And the same for a beehive, because the beehive is, of course, sort of surrounding a number of bees, but that sort of surrounding and the cooperation between bees is completely different than is normally asked for dual closure. And there's no way placing a beehive in the dual closure sequence. So if we predict something in the future, it must be an operator. And then another regularity that we can look for, I have to look at the time. Oh yeah, we're doing very well actually. Clusters of operators, in the sense that the hierarchy can be subdivided into clusters. And that has been done in the past because people speak about chemosphere, biosphere, noosphere, that sort of terminology. And here I will introduce clusters that start with a base operator and that continue with composite operators. So every cluster starts with a base operator. How does that work? Well, if you have the hadron, here we have the basic pictures of base operators and composite operators. So the hadron is a base operator, and if a cluster starts with that, you can make sort of the bar for the cluster, and you can make the next bar for the next cluster that starts with atoms. And you can make the next bar for the next cluster that starts with the cell and continues with the multicellulars, the host cell, and the multi-host cell. And then you can make a bar for the memons. So now we have actually 4 clusters. I will repeat them. There's the hadron cluster. That's how I've called them. There's the atom cluster. That's sort of the chemosphere. Then there's the cell cluster. This is an underpinning of the biosphere. And here is the memon cluster, which is an underpinning for the noosphere, because memons create the noosphere. Then we have operator families. What is an operator family? It is something that has not been used. It emerges from this way of thinking. An operator family are operators sharing the same family property. Yeah, what am I talking about? Well, if you have the hadron, it consists of three quarks, either protons or three quarks. It is a multi-particle. And then the next multi-particle is the particle consists of atoms, and that's the molecule. So it consists of several atoms. And then you have a primitive multicellular form, that is the blue-green algae, cyanobacteria. They have multiple cells connected by plasma connections, so they are a multi-operator. And then there is the systems like plants, they are multi-host cell structure. So here we have several multi-type operators over and across our clustering into like atom clusters and cell clusters. So this is a different way of organizing the same thing. Here I've organized the clusters in sort of rising complexity. And I've done that because I want to show that there are more closure operator families than the one we just discussed. So I'm going to put the multi-operators, that's the ones where we just put the arrows, at the right side to show that they're all of one family. And, well, that's what happens. But what we still have is that here, and here, we can also make families. And the question is, of course, how would we call these? It's a new field of discovery. So what I discovered is that the base operator, that's the one here in every cluster, introduces the family property that is in this column. So we have the base operator like hadrons that consists of 3 quarks, and they introduce the multi-state family. And then we have the atom, and it introduces what I consider the separate interface family, because here, for the first time in evolution, you can see that the interface, the spatial closure, is separate from the nucleus, and in the cell, the same happens. This is all interpretation, and it's new, but there's a lot of thinking gone into this. But it's open for discussion. Then we have a cell, and a cell does something very peculiar, actually. It does by its autocatalysis, it does structural copying of information. And that's why I call this family that way. And then we have the memon, and that's or animals, and they are an auto-evolution family. So now we have 4 different families that also can help to make predictions about what will be here, because so far there's nothing here. So how many future memon types will there be here in this area? Because here they're all filled up, but how many will be here? And here the sort of algorithmic structure can help us, because I can say the hadron gives us a system type A, then the cell, the atom gives us type B, but the multi-atom is a B with the property of A. And then I can make C, which is the cell. And the cell can either become multicellular, then it repeats the property of A. It can become eukaryotic, it can become a host cell, then it repeats the property of the atom, the distance of uh, um, the spatial closure. And it can be multicellular as a eukaryotic cell, and then it repeats actually B and A. And then we can go further. And here you can see, well, it's a bit more complicated because there are more options, but what you see is that it just adds a new factor and then repeats all the properties that had been introduced before. So if this is correct, and I leave that completely open to discussion, but it's interesting that it's at least possible to see it this way, then there would be uh, not one, not two, not four, but 8 possibilities for system types in the Memon cluster. So this gives us a prediction about the future that we, at least many people, haven't thought about at all. If we know this, we can fill in the cluster by drawing the same arrows and seeing them as filling up these closure or the operator families. This would be normally a point where I ask people like, can you still follow what I'm doing? I hope you can follow, and if you don't, please ask questions at the end. And now we are almost there. It's a question of what will be the next step. And the next step is predictable once we have this picture. And I'm not going to explain or even speculate about all these possible states because many of them are so far in the future, at least 30 or maybe 100 years away, and their properties are can be interpreted in several ways. So I will try to keep it minimal and only look here and here. And why is that? Because there is a low and a high potential past steps. So here I can learn something about what is probable at the higher level. Here we saw that cells create bacterial multicellularity. That was sort of a simple step, but it was also low potential because it just created blue-green algae and nothing more. Yeah, a few other multicellular beings, but they never became very complex as organisms. I think that's because their genetics are too low level of organization. There's not much in the bacterium, so it's very hard to organize that in a way that you can create real complexity. And the real complexity came after the bacteria created eukaryotic cells, which then became multicellular eukaryotes, and that was high potential. We got mushrooms, we got ferns, we got algae in the sea, and so there's a lot more than just here in the blue-green algae possibility. So if we translate this low and high possibility pathway to the next level, then we get a low potential pathway. That's the direct step to a multi-stadium, a multi-memon. What could that be? Well, that means the coupling of several memons. Well, you don't couple several mice, but we do know in nature that corals have connected tissue and in sometimes separate neural webs for every polyp, and sometimes they have connected neural webs for all the polyps. So there's a multi-memon structure. And you can have animals with 2 brains. There actually exist humans with 2 brains. And these, you could think that they are multi-memon, but there is a criterion for being an operator that is not fulfilled. And that is that if we have a brain here and another brain here, then their connection should be made for a next level operator by a new property. And I see no new property connecting these cow brains or any other brains in these kind of seeming multi-stages. So I think nature has not arrived at the multi-memon level there. So still lacking new type of interaction. And then we can have the last potential, and that the high potential future step, and that is structural copying of information. And that's because the cell actually, as the first organism, could and had to copy all its structures to keep them in existence so that the cell could function. That happens automatically during autocatalysis or autopoiesis for the entire cell. But now we have to find a way to think about that at a higher level, in the sense that, a mouse does not structural copy its information in its brain. There are no parts of the brain that are copied in any way. There's just knowledge taking shape in the full brain. The cells are kept alive and they make new connections, but there's no copying whatsoever. So can that be solved? I am still searching for the best way to deal with this, and I found another aspect that is interesting, and that is individual information structures, because in the cell, the genes are sort of individual information structures, and they are in the brain, they are not there. So it would be nice if we, while we think conceptual, could make a machine where our concepts, like our words, are individual structures that can be copied. So the brain has neither structural nor individual, I can't read it, sorry. It's behind the pictures. I can make them very small, actually. Oh yeah, this helps. So the brain has neither structural copying nor individual information structures. So it cannot be used, actually. And you can see that when you have the same word or the same thing that you're seeing or hearing about, you get different parts of the brains, and it's whole fields of brain activity that actually capture that word. But you can't copy anything there. And now this is roughly the last slide, so we are at the end. I think if we have a concept memon as the next step, and I call it the concept memon because it works on concepts that can be copied if you have them in a computer, then this is the memon, and it has concepts in its brain like car. Then it has experience and activity like another car. And then there is a new concept for car, which becomes the absolutely new concept. So in this way, concepts can be changed and copied while being modified and then put back like this is the new state. I'm not a computer scientist. I have a friend who is. He works in this field very much and very deep. I find it very interesting. But I leave this open to other people that are more experienced. But what you can see here is that as a whole operator, it experiences things. It has common sense. It, in principle, could have emotions and feelings, and it could therefore have consciousness because it could experience itself. And you need the whole operator for that. So large language models are interesting because they sort of put together very well-fitting parts of text, but it has no idea what an apple is when it comes to how does an apple taste to the large language model. It knows how to put text into structure, but it hasn't any idea about what it is to really eat an apple. So there's a lot that we still have to do there. So in conclusion, well, the third law, dual closure leads to next level operator, and this extends Darwin's view quite a bit. Then we have the third law that connects transitions from physical to mimic. That is something that other theories don't. There's the major evolutionary transition theory, for example, by Minot Smith and Zedmery. I've analyzed it in the book. For those who are interested, please read it because it needs major restructuring. And then there is the technical memons that are the most likely next step in evolution. We've seen that in the last slide. Interestingly enough, I'm not the first and not at all, because many people, of course, think now that robots will be the future, but they have no underlying closure theory for that. And Samuel Butler, just a few years after Darwin's major work, he wrote Darwin Among the Machines, and he predicted that the machines would become more intricate than human beings. So this brings us to me thanking you all for your attention. It has been quite a journey, I think. And if you're curious to read more, please read my Third Law of Evolution and the Future of Life book, or visit my website. It needs some edit work, but I will do that in the next month. But the book offers a lot more than we've been discussing today. So now it's time for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerard. Wonderful. So,
Yeah, thank you.
I hope I've been able to join ideas in your society.
Yeah.
So people are raising their hands here, and I think I'm going to be moderating the question and answer session here following. And our normal form is to ask you to raise your digital hand, or if I can see in the window your big hand or your real hand. And that might help actually if you've finished sharing the screen, unless perhaps you might want to leave it up in case people ask about particular slides. That might be helpful at the moment. So, and then at the end of, when we've reached the end of our hand questions, we have something called Later in the Bar, which is sort of a tribute to, or a nod to Stafford Beer, where we stop the recording and we have more of a Later in the Bar kind of conversation. Anyway, so the first hand up I see here is from Steve Battle. Steve.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for a great talk, Gerard. So my question is, when you first described operators, kind of the bells went off in my head. I said, this sounds exactly like autopoiesis. So I'm glad you mentioned it later, because I thought you weren't going to mention that at all. But I kind of wonder, are they equivalent? Because when you've not convinced me that kind of the lower subcellular kind of atomic or hadron kind of operators are autopoietic. So maybe the concepts are different. And is it because in autopoiesis, the closed process, it's a closed process of production. So it makes its own parts. Whereas atoms don't make themselves. Atoms are made in stars. We're all made of stars, that kind of thing. So things are fused together in stars to make atoms, even if they've got shells. So I don't think they've got closed processes of production. So I wouldn't describe them as autopoietic. So have I completely misunderstood you, or not?
Yeah, it's very logical that you ask questions about autopoiesis. Because autopoiesis at the level of the cell, of the bacterial cell, is analogous. How do you say that? Is an analogy with dual closure, but only there. Because if you do autopoiesis at higher levels, or for an atom does not have autopoiesis. There's nothing made, there's nothing maintained. It is just sort of pulled together. So autopoiesis is a local interpretation of dual closure for a bacterial or an archaeal cell. And I think dual closure can actually solve discussions about autopoiesis at other levels, where people run into trouble because they want a construction process for the whole thing, which then sort of needs first order, second order, third order autopoiesis like thinking. I think I introduce a different way of doing the same, but doing it really in a different way.
Okay, thank you.
Is that okay?
Marina.
You-
Marina's got her hand up.
Hi. Yes. So I've just joined. Apologies. I've just seen the message.
I can't see you.
Just one second. I'm going to post my question here. I'm a cosmologist, but en ik spreek een beetje Nederlands.
Ja.
But I'm Portuguese, and in the last bit of talk by Gerard, I was able to understand the same question that I believe we are having in physics, but at the onset of life, and it is the same question that prevents us from developing AI systems, which is we don't understand what is the transition between having a set of elements that can be in a cell at the origin of life on our planet, that collectively decide, even for a prokaryotic cell, so without a nucleus, they collectively decide elements entering and leaving the membrane. This is good for us, and this is bad for us. Good for the cell, bad for the cell. It's a simple, you guys in philosophy have better terminology. We in physics are trying to have a description for what happens when a set of physical elements of atoms or molecules or decide that we are now going to have volition, in the sense that we are going to evaluate collectively what is good for the set of elements in a cell, what is bad for the cell. This does not have a solution. I've been reviewing Stuart Kaufman's latest book, which is not yet published, and I worked with him very together, and I admire his work a lot, but I believe that he yet still has not answered this question. And while we don't have the answer to this question, for this mystery, how a set of atoms decides to have a volition to exist, we will not be able to replicate that in machines, or from the computer sciences point of view.
Yeah. What is your question?
What is the answer? Do you have an answer for if I have a bag of dead elements, say abiotic material?
Oh, yeah.
In the beginning of the not of the universe. Sorry, I do beginning of the planet.
Yeah.
How do they start to want to exist?
To be an ensemble.
Yeah.
That's a hard question. If it was an easy question, people would have done experiments and solved it.
But you have the answer.
But even experiments with black smokers in the laboratory haven't solved this. In my book, the Third Law, I give 6 or 7 criteria that I think must be met at the beginning of the first cell. And there is something special about the cell, because before that, like quarks and atoms and molecules, hadrons and atoms and molecules, they all are the result of condensation-like processes, in the sense that nature produced a kind of magnets that by themselves were glued together. There were thermodynamic reasons for atoms to form molecules and for protons and neutrons to form nuclei. But the thermodynamic reasons for molecules to go together and form a cell are a bit more complicated, because not only do you need an autocatalytic set of chemicals in the sense of Kaufman, but you also need a membrane to keep them together and to create a unit that has its own pH, its own salinity, its own fatty acids content, etc. So there must be two processes at the same time. One is there must be a membrane forming, and it must capture a group of molecules that, by hazard or with a little bit higher chance than pure hazard, are together in a small volume, and then can sort of start doing Kaufman-like autocatalytic processes, in the hope that when they produce more material and the cell splits, that the autocatalytic set will be in both products. And we are not there yet.
I don't think Stu has it, because according to what I see, and although he has made, I've proposed with Stu, but I've proposed this science called biocosmology, in which essentially we're trying to understand what is the bridge between theoretical physics and biology, using Stu's theory of the adjacent possible. So we're trying to count microstates in a thermodynamical point of view of the complexity of living systems. But still, from what I see, the prescriptions are in the sense of, if I were to put a bag of rocks inside of plastic bag, they are supposed to become sentient in the same way, and they should become alive. I mean,
well, depends on the kind of plastic bag.
And so for AI, the last thing I would like to say, that this was important for me. Edward Snowden, about 3 years ago, he made this very, very remark, which, without knowing, I believe, the biology behind it, but he said that the LLMs will not achieve this drive for existence because they don't have the capacity to hurt. And at that time, I thought, what does he mean? And then I think in transcribed to biology, this is your question that you're trying to answer. So thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing conversations. Elena, you have your hand up. Please ask your question.
Yes. Well, what I wanted to ask was about the potential of biological computers to make that next step. He didn't have very much time or opportunity, but Stafford experimented with you trying to use Daphnia to solve equations, and did have some success in using a tank of pond water with different little critters in it to solve equations. And he worked a little bit with Gordon Pask on some of those ideas. Do you see any potential in larger scale biological computers, like the use by economists of mouse colonies to solve economic questions?
Difficult question. And I have to split the field of in two, because the operator theory works with operators, and a pond with creatures or a group of ants are an interaction system. They are a system of interacting ants or of interacting creatures in a pond. So maybe you can solve some mathematical problems with groups of creatures. And a friend of mine, Atanu Chatterjee, has recently published very interesting papers on the behavior of ants and how they solve problems, and another paper about, in general, how these processes work. And I think you solve a problem, but you solve it in a different way than that your and my brain would solve it. Our nerve cells are, of course, also sort of a group, but they are a very specific group confined by your sensors and your activators. So the group of neurons in your brain is both sensing things, really, while a group of ants doesn't sense things as a group. The ants do things because they are there at the moment and that sort of things, and they can communicate by hormones. But it's also a question of tug of war and the rules for the tug of war. And your brain is really sensing, oh, this hurts. Yes, this is nice. I like more. That sort of things. And that is what you cannot do as a group of ants. So I think you solve maybe a similar mathematical question by a very different method. And I don't see how you can compare them really, because then I would compare operators with interaction systems.
Thank you.
Mauricio.
Hi, how are you? Oh, everybody. Hi, Gerard. How are you doing? I first would like to answer a question that you posed me in July. And the answer is that we can use my mathematics to formalize what you just said. But we need to do some certain adaptations. Because a signal for me, a pion is a signal, and the signal can connect two organizations. So what you have as an operator, it depends on how I solve the problem of, we solve the problem of what is information. So information is bad represented in mathematics in several ways. And what we think about information is quite connected to what you think about the part of the operator that connects the two objects. So, and this is, if you go in this way, and if we relax how we describe life, relax in the sense of the title of a paper that I read in the 80s, and it's fantastic, that in life phenomena, we need to allow, restrain, but not determine. So we need to find ways of describing life in a certain manner. You did it very well here. So that we allowed things to happen, but not required them to happen, you see? And so I see the levels of operators that you have posed something very similar in this way. So it requires a different way of thinking, but I think it's feasible. And it's feasible, and we may have a framework, a ground to describe these things in an integrated form.
Mhm.
But there is a problem here in your description I see, is that your operator is in somehow non-living, it's static. So it's logical. It's in terms of it's a matter of symbols and the connection between symbols. And you talk about processes, but you don't put the process there. The process for me is something that has time inside, and it continues has time inside. So, and an organization in my description can do that. So we have lots to work here. I think that I need to sit down after this amazingly beautiful introduction to your book. We can sit down and start discussing this.
Yeah, I would like to do that.
Yeah, me too. So it's a very good position. Most of the things have a strong convergence in your ideas and what I think about being an organization, the difference between a system and organization is that a system has two sides. You know, the thinghood and the systemhood. So what connects things together and the things that are connected together. As an organization, an organization can be both a thing and what connects things together. See? So, and this makes a big difference between the two perspectives. Peter Kovalov had asked me a question about information, and I'm working on that. And maybe I have something to output in the next weeks. And I think that the things can converge to a very nice ground where we can put everything that you said. And the people who asked it here very neatly together.
Sounds like interesting things to explore.
Yes, that's my question to you. Yes, that can we do that together?
Yeah, I think we can do that. Yeah, I've two remarks. One is I'm a biologist by study, so dynamics and processes are at the very basis of everything I've always been doing. But when you get into more abstract things like autopoiesis or closure or autocatalysis, then sort of the closeness of the autocatalytic process is a constant, even though the chemical processes may change in the meantime. So there's either a flux side or a static side to it, both at the same time.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and I've also looked into information. So but that's a long story. I think we could do that together. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly what Harold called architecture, but it's a mixture of things and processes and that are all together. So processes can be a thing and interact with all the process themselves. Go further on like that. But the hierarchy is neater. You can. I still don't understand what you mean by closure.
Well, I look forward to hearing that you two have got together after this and have sorted all of that out, and then you'll come back and tell us in due course. I think that would be wonderful. Thank you very much for that
Thank you.
And I think it's one of the delights of cybernetics is that we can have
Yes,
opportunities for these kind of transdisciplinary whatever. So let's move to Jonah, who has his hand up.
Thank you. And really enjoyed the talk. I always enjoy thinking about these sort of big picture syntheses of physics and biological evolution. I guess where I was a bit sort of skeptical and like curious to hear your thoughts is, so this it kind of relates to where we ended with the previous question, actually. Sort of how would you define spatial closure exactly, and specifically in relation to, let's say, an atom? It seems like in the case of an atom, you basically have a dynamical system. You have time-dependent differential equations, the Schrödinger equation, basically, and that's what determines both the interaction between the particles and what you might call the spatial closure. It's sort of the spatial boundedness of the system. I'm curious of how you think of spatial closure in that context. And if it's just a matter of spatial boundedness, it's not clear why that doesn't apply to things like human societies, which are also sort of spatially bounded.
In the hierarchy of the operators, every next level is determined by specific rules how you go from the preceding level to the next level. So one of the rules for the process closure is that it has to be a new process based on the preceding level objects that creates the closure. For example, if you have atoms, there are atoms that do not bind. They are the noble gases, for example. Their electron shells are complete. They don't care about binding. And then you have sort of a new property that there are other atoms that have incomplete shells, and they will naturally bind, at least much easier. So that's the new property that then allows a new process of binding. So in that sense, at every level where you make the next process closure, you always have sort of diverging options between some particles at the preceding level that don't reach that, and others that do. Which in a way is a sort of link to selection. And then your spatial closure question, I think that's one of the difficult things. Explaining this at every level, spatial closure and process closure are of course different, but and that's why I would say please read my book, because I explain it at every level in great detail. But the topology, the overall structure is the same, and it has to be the first option to create that new structure. So that makes the whole hierarchy sort of compact. How do you call that? There are no ways of putting something in between. If you go from one level to the next, that also is the first option to create that next level. So that makes the hierarchy very stringent. Well, maybe something for separate discussions afterward.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Camillo.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Good to see you, Peter. Thank you very much, Margaret, and good to see Alina again. Thank you very much, Gerard, for your talk. Very informing. I enjoyed it a lot. Well, I have three questions. I have three questions, very specific, not to elaborate on them. The first would be, in the description of the operator you made at the beginning, how similar, how different are the entities that constitute it are or should be? And this could be important for the attendees that might be thinking about extrapolating the dynamics into social evolution. The second question would be, have you explored Umberto Maturana's and Jorge Podosi's theory of natural drift? This is because I noticed that your formulation embraces many of the evolutionary theories that have been present in cybernetics and systems theory. And it accounts for the phylogenetic changes in the evolutionary process. But it would be very nice to get your take on the drifting dynamics and the ontogenic adaptations that promote evolution as Maturana and Podosi's mentioned. And third, this is my personal interest, is whether the dynamics you propose account for the processes of change. I want to ask you whether you have thought about the role of time in the theoretical structure you have proposed to us today. Thank you very much. That would be the three ideas I would like to get your take on.
Yeah. You have to help me because I've got 3 questions, and for every question I have to listen very carefully because I could not understand things very well. So maybe we do one or two words for the first question, 1 or 2 for the second, and one. Sorry for that.
Thank you.
So the first question.
The first question would be what in the structure of the operator you proposed, how different or how similar do the two entities that constitute it should be or are by definition?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's a good question. Like I can maybe choose an example at a certain level to explain that. For example, if you have molecules, then they are consisting of 2 or more atoms. And I only draw 2 because that's the minimum. Everything that I depict is in the minimum state. So if I have atoms, well, they can be very different because many different atoms can form a molecule. So, but they must be atoms. So they must be from the preceding level. I think that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
I hope it does.
No, I will elaborate on that in the future and get in touch with you if you don't mind. But partly, as Margaret noticed, my research matches a lot yours. So I hope I can contact you in the future. Well, the second one is about Maturana and Podosi's theory of natural drift, and they place a very special emphasis on 2 things. The first, the drifting dynamic in evolution, and the second on the ontogenic adaptations that are materialized after all in the phylogenetic changes, evolutionary changes.
Yeah, this is, I think, a question specific for biology. Yeah, and drift implies mating, and that you cannot really decide what you choose for. So you just choose something that appears nice, and then you get drift. That's how I understand it. I don't know how they write about it, but it's a very basic process in a course of random increase and decrease of gene fractions in populations, and it's most important in small populations. At least it has most effect. Yeah.
They explain it in a very particular way. Is that while the organisms or the species has the potentiality to form a closure with the environment in their adaptation, they have a larger potentiality to adapt to other adaptations. In fact, Podosis, for example, made the argument of the iguanas at the Galapagos Island. You remember the sea iguana, right? Actually, there's a cousin of the sea iguana that is a land animal in the same island, but that the cousin species can also hold their breath underwater, and when they don't have food on on the land, on the dry land, they go and swim up to 8 minutes, just as the sea iguanas. So they call it that the potentiality of their genetic structure to adapt to different environments, and that is I believe the ontogenic adaptations of this species.
Okay. Then your question, I think I understand now, is more in the direction of, can we predict selection in a certain way? If there's a certain selection force, can you then predict it? So this would be, for me, maybe an answer in the question of yes, you can, and not no, you can't.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, and the final one, which is a very egotistical one, because my concern, my current concern, is whether have you thought about the event of the variable of time within the evolutionary process you have proposed?
Oh yeah, interestingly, time, when it comes to dual closures, is not a factor. I can't tell anything about it, because whether it takes long time from a bacteria to a eukaryotic cell, I don't know. Maybe if nature is happy, it can be in a week, but if nature is unlucky, it takes 200 million years. So, but I just look at the change in structure, in organization. And there is in the book at the end a graph where I take time into account, but then it is long evolutionary time. It's actually cosmic time.
Yeah.
So then you can see that. But yeah, the problem then is, of course, how do you deal with time at the very beginning of the universe? Because then everything was very heavy, and time is sort of very slow. So even though you think the universe is expanding very fast, you have no real feeling of what time is at that moment. So I don't know how to put that in the graph. So I get several dots at one point, and then a long time nothing, and then there are hadrons and atoms, and then still further on the first cell, and then it goes quicker. Actually, it accelerates acceleratingly, I think.
Yeah,
Thank you very much,
inflation.
Gerard.
I thought I was procrastinating from the early universe and hiding in this call, and now you found me at the early universe. I'm an early universe inflation person. Gerard, who studies time.
Well,
I think I
Marina,
missed.
maybe we can hear from you at one of these events in the future. Maybe I'll be in touch and
Sure,
come
sure.
and tell us a little bit more about that.
I thought I was heading safely in biology. and
No,
it
you've
didn't
disclosed
sound-
yourself now. No, I'm sorry. It's all over. You're out in the open now. Yeah. That's me being funny. Okay. Let me move on. David, you're up, and then perhaps we'll go to the bar.
Hey, okay, right, thanks. In answer to the question, will AI be the next step? Arguably, but going on beyond the individual organization, we've already, individual animal, as it were, we've already had great developments like that brilliant Dutch invention, the corporation. Each level we go up, your various entities go up. There's a restriction on them, and so we develop cultural restrictions, legal restrictions, environmental restrictions. Sorry, I'm about to cough. All over the place. Evolution continues at all the levels. I mean, the bacteria that are at the bottom of the food chain are arguably also at the top, so to speak. There's this continual mutual either plundering or dependence. We've got the notions of cooperation and competition embedded in evolution, but we've also, as I think Kamino said, genetic drift, it's dancing, pattern generation, if you like. So there's an awful lot of things going on all over the place. I mean, presumably we're going to be able to much better biohack ourselves in, retaliation to AI if we don't get on too well with it. And I'm sure in some ways we will, and in some ways we won't. But given that they're a lot faster than us, but possibly less flexible in changing their internal structure, there are tensions there in developing your comment, hypothesis, argument. I mean, am I going in the right direction here as far as your thoughts go, or is this totally off beam and irrelevant? I mean, AI may be a form of government, so to speak, to ourselves, but government is a form of government uh, itself. So is it just is AI really the next level, or is more sophisticated modes of operation by information processors such as human beings? And I always want to mention the killer whales uh, as much a part of the picture as AI itself, or something hybrid.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, there's one point in your question, I think, that hints at the difference between the operators and the world around them and the world that they create.
Yeah.
And the operator hierarchy, of course, strictly looks from one operator to the next type and to the next type, and it sort of, for convenience of the reasoning, neglects that there are interaction systems in which this all takes place and in which they play a role. So once there are organisms with sufficient brain capacity, a kind of memon, therefore, that interact in groups and can build a society, and you get societal levels of organization, then you get levels in an interaction system. So yes, these levels are real, and Tyler Falk also discusses them, but they are social interactive levels. If you have rules in society or that sort of things, or like local communities that connect to a country or to that is a completely different way of leveling. If you allow me, I don't know whether I'm still I'm still connected. Wait,
Yeah, you are.
this is. Can you see this graph now?
We can see three types of hierarchy.
Yeah.
There's three types of hierarchy, and there's a mouse on top. That's the memon, so that could be humans making a human society, and the hierarchy beneath is from quarks to atoms to molecules to cells to eukaryotic cells to multicellulars to the mouse, and then this is the upward hierarchy, I call that. That's towards the next type of operator, but that's not the only hierarchy, although the units of this hierarchy, the operators, are always the basis. If you look at an operator, you can also look inward, and now I take a human being as an example, and you can see it has intestines, and then there are cells, and the cells have mitochondria, and then there's DNA in it, and smaller parts. So you can, once you are at a certain level, you can look inward, and frequently we then use fired levels, and I use fixed levels by dual closure, and fired levels like organs are, that's not a dual closure level, so that is different kind of leveling. And on the other side, you have the outward direction, as I call it, where you have interacting operators. And then again, you get fired levels. That is us determining what is a level, because bisons can form herds, or maybe small family groups, or larger family groups, or populations, or communities in a prairie, and then finally the whole biosphere. So with the operator at the basis, you can either look towards the next operator type, and then you look upward. You can look inside the operator, and you can look how operators interact. And the fun is that you can do that for every level. So this is also, the operator hierarchy is also a theory about how to analyze the world into hierarchies. I think this solves part of your. Oh, sorry. Now I click everything away.
It
But I
definitely
think
addresses
this
it.
solves
Yes.
part of your question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you all for the questions, and thank you for the presentation and the answers and the discussion. I'm going to now conclude the recording.